Hi there, welcome to Talking Radio podcast. Today we are going to be discussing Aeronautical Radio Station Operator. Aeronautical Radio Station Operator refers to a ground-based unit or an offshore unit. We're going to focus on both and give you a brief explanation of each. My name is Dylan Kemlo, and today's topic, it covers a variety of disciplines, and it will take us through a number of podcasts to introduce you to that particular operator and the tasks that they manage. And the focus is somebody that communicates on an aeronautical frequency from a base station. Now, the aeronautical radio station operator facilitates various tasks, one of them being an operator sitting on the ground, communicating with air traffic and passing them relevant information. This information comprises of topics such as expected time of arrival, fuel to be uploaded, number of passengers that are going to be transiting, etc. The pilot communicates in this instance with that person on a separate frequency, and that operator on the ground will manage the information accordingly. Let's break up the various disciplines involved under this topic and give you a brief explanation of each. So we're going to start with what's more commonly termed the base operation. Base station operator is a person that's passing information to a commercial aircraft or a charter aircraft. This information is relevant to the flight with regards to persons on board, fuel to be uploaded, expected time of arrival, etc. The communication that takes place between the pilot and the base operator in this instance is on a separate frequency assigned to that operation and does not interfere with any other operational frequency. In other words, information that's relayed on this frequency is pertinent to that flight itself, and the information is then transmitted and managed accordingly by the operator on the ground. So in addition to the voice communication on frequency, they'll be taking care of various administrative tasks as well. And this function forms part of their duty. In this podcast, we're just focusing on the fact that such an operator exists. And in later podcasts, we'll define each of these disciplines as we progress through this Talking Radio series. The next person that falls within this category wish to communicate with the air traffic controller in order to, for example, tow an aircraft, do a runway inspection, or maneuver the vehicle on the airfield during operational management by the ATC of air traffic. In order to do so, they need to communicate with ATC and advise the ATC of their intentions, and the ATC will give them further instructions. We then move on to the next discipline that falls within this category, and that operator is utilized in disaster management situations. In this instance, a procedure is followed for a disaster that takes place within a certain category, and the person that's manning the frequency is communicating with all other operators involved in the disaster itself. This is a very stressful position and a stressful time for the person that is manning that frequency, because just like the base operator that we mentioned earlier, that individual has additional tasks that they need to manage while communicating on frequency. In all these disciplines that we've mentioned so far, radio telephony plays a huge part in their communication on the designated frequency for their particular operation. And that individual needs to have a good command of RT for that specific function. Now, the person that's designated to manage base operations will not readily be able to facilitate the position of that person that's managing the disaster role, for example, as the radio telephony used for each of these disciplines is not always the same. So always remember, if you're a person that's facilitating the base operations for communication between ground to aircraft in a daily operation, that if you undertake the duties of the person managing a disaster, that you would need to familiarize yourself with procedures associated with disaster management, and that you would need to do a specific course in this regard prior to communicating on the frequency. Each state has their own procedures with regards to these disciplines and the licenses that need to be obtained. However, the procedures that are followed by each of these disciplines is very much the same throughout. So it's important to remember that if you're going to communicate on that frequency, that you're trained to do so. If you have a pilot's license, for example, you would be able to manage the frequency in most instances. However, you would still be in unfamiliar territory in terms of the procedures that need to be applied. The next operator that falls inside this category is that person who manages offshore operations. In this instance, this is communication between the helicopter that is flying to and from an offshore installation. The offshore installation could be an oil rig, it could be a tanker, it could be any vessel that is at sea that's able to facilitate a helicopter on its deck. In other words, it has a heli deck for the helicopter to transit to and from. Again, this individual is managing a unique situation. So if they've come from land-based operations and they transit into offshore-based operations, they need to familiarize with the procedures that are involved with that particular discipline prior to communicating on frequency. All communication on this frequency is important, and the person who manages that frequency needs to ensure that they follow procedures assigned to that particular discipline. When the helicopter transits to and from the offshore platform, the communications between the helicopter and the operator that's going to facilitate their arrival is all managed on an aeronautical frequency, even though we are now moving into a marine environment. So if you hold a marine radio license, for example, and you are going to be communicating on an aeronautical frequency, then you need to be in possession of an aeronautical radio station license for that particular function. The state that you're going to operate in will have the necessary procedures that need to be followed in order to achieve this particular license. In certain instances, this particular discipline is seen as a certification and not as a license. So as a licensed operator, you do not need to do any refresher training, but as a certificated operator, you may need to do a refresher course every certain period of time, for example, every 2 years. This information would be recorded within the regulatory body for that state concerned. Being an aeronautical radio station operator in any one of these categories gives you the opportunity to manage a frequency and allows you to facilitate a role that forms part of the overall operation. It is your duty to ensure that your radio is serviced, that you do the relevant radio checks before taking over the watch, and that you follow the particular procedures which include the radio telephony as assigned for that particular discipline. What's important to remember with regards to the frequency that you're working on as the aeronautical station operator for that particular function that you are fulfilling is that you cannot communicate on any other frequency without the relevant permission. So take, for example, the aeronautical radio station operator working on the ground, communicating with the aircraft that's part of their commercial operation at the same time that the air traffic controller is managing that aircraft. The aeronautical radio station operator cannot change frequency to the live frequency with ATC and ask them a question such as, confirm you are in communication with this aircraft. They can telephone the ATC and ask them that very same question, but the license and certification which authorizes them to communicate with the aircraft on that particular frequency has limitations. So in terms of your duties when fulfilling any of these roles that we've mentioned today, make sure that you comply with the relevant procedures that are associated with it. We also mentioned earlier that we have a mobile aeronautical radio station operator, and that person would be on the ground, for example, in a mobile unit, communicating in instances such as managing a disaster situation, or it could also be an operator that's facilitating drone or commercial drone operation, doing their tasks that they're fulfilling in a remote location or area, where monitoring functions and procedures need to be maintained during the operation itself. The person managing the mobile unit, in the case of the drone, will also have additional tasks and duties while facilitating the commercial drone operation. That person could also be monitoring the position of the drone through satellite technology while communicating with the pilot of the drone itself. And their job would be to ensure the safety of the drone during their flight operations. So to summarize this podcast, the aeronautical radio station operator communicates on frequency and provides a service specific to the role that they are fulfilling for that particular discipline. All radio telephony that is used during these operations forms part of a procedure that ensures a safe and smooth operation when managed accordingly. That wraps up this podcast on aeronautical radio station operator. Thanks for joining me today. We will unpack each of these disciplines in future podcasts and look forward to seeing you in the next one. Take care and chat soon. Goodbye.